This morning, attorneys for Donald Trump are expected to resume their questioning of former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker in the former president's criminal trial. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard has a recap of yesterday's testimony.
On his third day on the stand, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker told the jury he refused to catch and kill Stormy Daniels' story about her relationship with then-candidate Donald Trump. Pecker said he told his right-hand man at the Enquirer not to pay Daniels the $120,000 she was seeking because they'd already shelled out tens of thousands of dollars to keep other stories about Mr. Trump quiet. If anyone should buy it, Pecker said, it should be Donald Trump and Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer. Pecker says when he told Cohen, quote, he was upset and responded that the boss, referring to Trump, would be furious with me. Pecker said he believed Mr. Trump or his company had paid Daniels until Cohen told him in December of 2016 that he was the one who paid her. Prosecutors are seeking to prove Mr. Trump doctored internal business records to cover up that payment. Pecker also testified Trump was aghast when he saw Stormy Daniels on 60 Minutes.
Was it hush money to stay silent?
Yes.
Pecker says Trump called him. He said, we have an agreement with Stormy Daniels that she cannot mention my name. Trump later denied knowledge of the arrangement. On cross-examination, Mr. Trump's lawyers challenging Pecker's credibility and business practices. At a campaign event earlier in the day, Mr. Trump addressed the testimony of his longtime friend.
David's been very nice. He's a nice guy.
Did you know about the payment to Stormy Daniels before the 2020 election? Pecker also testifying about a payment his company did make to former Playboy model Karen McDougal to keep her alleged affair with Mr. Trump quiet. Pecker said he coordinated with Cohen because he was concerned paying McDougal could violate campaign finance law. So they worked up an agreement to pay for her contributions to magazines owned by American media, adding he believed Trump was aware of the payment. The prosecution asking Pecker, was your principal purpose to suppress her story so as not to influence the election? Pecker responding, yes, it was.
Vaughn Hilliard reporting for us. Sarah, Lisa Rubin, you were inside the courtroom yesterday, so I want to get to some of the substance of David Pecker's testimony. But first, if you could just paint a picture what the energy was like in the room, what Donald Trump, who appeared to be more agitated than he's been over the last week and a half yesterday, what was it like in the room?
It was tense, but also there was an energy where just everyone was so interested, including the jurors. Our colleague Tom Winter was sitting in the courtroom with me. We were sitting on different sides of the courtroom. I was sitting behind the prosecution. Tom was sitting behind the defense. And so from his vantage point, the jury was sort of diagonal to him. And he said that at one point, watching the jurors try to process the questioning was like watching a tennis match because their eyes kept going like this, right, volleying back and forth between Joshua Steinglass from the DA's office asking the questions and David Pecker to see how he would answer them. And then you could also, from where I was sitting, catch a glimpse of Donald Trump, who was far more energetic than he has been in recent days because David Pecker was talking about him, and not just about him, but about conversations and multiple conversations that David Pecker and Donald Trump had going well into 2018 that showed, Willie, as you just noted, that Trump had an awareness that Karen McDougal had come forward, that he consulted with David Pecker about what to do, that he was aware that David Pecker had paid Karen McDougal, and that he perpetually checked in with David Pecker to see how Karen McDougal was doing. In other words, was she sufficiently happy to keep herself quiet? When she wasn't, at a point in time after she had sued the Enquirer and wanted to be released from her non-disclosure agreement, Trump was furious to see Karen McDougal do an interview with Anderson Cooper, and Pecker recounted that conversation as well, Willie.
So it's interesting, the shorthand for this trial for some has been the Stormy Daniels hush money case. But really, as you note, Karen McDougal was kind of the focus yesterday. $150,000 that Mr. Pecker says he paid, hired her for a job. It was kind of a no-show job as a fitness writer or something like that. How does Karen McDougal factor into this case? How central is she?
Well, Karen McDougal is not central to the crime itself. Remember, again, the Manhattan DA has charged Donald Trump with falsification of business records. But what makes it a felony, according to the DA, is that those business records were falsified with the intent to either commit or conceal a crime. And they have now elaborated on that theory. based on the questioning, it seems that their theory is Donald Trump intended to conceal violations of campaign finance law and formed a conspiracy with Michael Cohen and David Pecker and potentially others to do so. Karen McDougal and burying her story was part and parcel of that conspiracy. So establishing the Karen McDougal story is a necessary predicate, but of course it doesn't get us all the way to the crime. Why? Because the business records that were falsified are in relation to the Stormy Daniels payment. So yes, David Pecker is a very central witness in establishing Trump's knowledge and intent in joining this conspiracy and doing it for purposes of subverting the election. But we are going to have to get to the Stormy Daniels story at some point. It just is not David Pecker's to tell. As he testified yesterday, he did not really have any direct involvement in the purchase or negotiation of the Stormy Daniels settlement. To the extent that the Inquirer did it all, it was behind his back. He testified that Dylan Howard, who was the chief content officer, got involved with that, even though Pecker had instructed him, we're not a bank. An affiliation with a porn star will offend our largest distributor, Walmart stores, and I want you to stay out of it. And yet Howard couldn't help himself and continued to serve sort of as a middleman between Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Keith Davidson, and Michael Cohen.
And David Pecker testified yesterday that after he took office, so from the White House, Donald Trump would call to check in on, quote, our girl, talking about Karen McDougal. And Pecker replied saying, she's quiet, she's fine, end quote. So Barbara McQuade, we've now entered cross-examination, began yesterday, will resume in a couple of hours now with David Pecker from Trump's legal team. What kind of witness was David Pecker for the prosecution? A good way to start?
Oh, I think he was a terrific way to start because, you know, he is somebody who is has a story to tell. He could establish the timeline. He could begin at the beginning in August of 2015 when this conspiracy began. And I think there's something very powerful when a person comes in and admits that they engaged in a crime itself. He's someone who's friends with Donald Trump. And so I think it makes it more difficult to cross-examine him and suggest that he's lying because he has an axe to grind in the way that we will hear from others like Michael Cohen. Of course, there will be more cross-examination today. And so that's really the more crucial part of a witness's testimony, to see how they hold up on cross-examination. But so far, I think all we've seen are things like efforts to suggest that the payment of hush money is normal for celebrities. We heard about Tiger Woods and Arnold Schwarzenegger and other people like that. So I think he's been a solid witness for the government and a good way to start. And I think, you know, prosecutors have this idea of the rules of primacy and recency, that when a jury goes back to deliberate, they're most likely to remember the first witness they heard and the last witness they heard. And so you always want to start strong and end strong and put your more challenging witnesses in the middle. So I imagine Michael Cohen, and if she testifies Stormy Daniels, will come somewhere in the middle because they're going to get beat up a little bit. But you want to start strong and end strong, and I think they succeeded in starting strong.
Jon Meacham, I'm thinking about you sitting here as a presidential historian listening to this conversation. We've become so inured to everything that Donald Trump does and his personal behavior over the last 10 years, and we're so familiar with some of the details of these cases that we just sort of talk through them. But when you take a step back and think about just this week, a president who was sitting in a courtroom over a hush money payment to a porn star, we're talking about hypotheticals at the Supreme Court, his attorneys, of whether or not he could use SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent. When you think about the indictments that came down 2 days ago in Arizona, where people on his behalf appointed themselves as fake electors and tried to overturn the results of the election, his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani, all wrapped up in this. You do have to take a step back sometimes and just digest how unprecedented, how extraordinary it is to see one man, one president, having allegedly done all of this.
Yeah, it's like The Walking Dead, the C-SPAN version, right? I mean, it's just this land of this crazy land of things. It is hard. It is hard to keep it all straight. It's hard to prioritize. To go to Barbara's point, what's the primary one here? What's the most recent one here? That's a really good way to try to figure it out. Politically, constitutionally, let me say, the most important thing that unfolded was the Supreme Court yesterday, trying to figure out what are the powers, what's the limit of the authority of the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States. And that's a vastly important question. It seemed as though the court had a certain awareness of that. They believe they are deciding something forever. Interesting. You can argue that perhaps the more conservative approach would be doing something a little more specific, as we were talking about. The New York case is kind of an only in New York thing. All the characters you're talking about. And the question is, are people who are committed to voting, because for the rest of us, the question is, are the people who are committed to voting for Donald Trump again, for the third time, are they affected by any of this? My own bet is no, that this is something that they have decided they are willing to put up with. And let's be clear, not just willing to put up with, but the hard truth about the American character at the moment is that people kind of like this. Let's just be honest, right? This is more entertaining than trying to figure out what to do about the manufacturing of computer chips or the border or dealing with the complexities of the Middle East or collective security in Europe. Those are hard things. And if that were what the country really wanted to focus on, guess what? That's what they would focus on. Trump is fundamentally an entertainer. That's where he started. Right. That's when he walked onto the stage. And what the test we're all facing, and I was thinking about this all day yesterday, the test we're facing is, as citizens, do we want a reality show or do we want reality? Do we want to govern our affairs in a less vivid but certainly more serious way? And that's a real question for a democracy. Do we get what we deserve? And I think that's a question fundamentally that the country has to confront going forward. And it's a very stark choice, right? President Biden is one way and former President Trump is another. And I don't think this is a particularly close call myself, but that's where a lot of the country needs to make their decision.